ideally artists and policymakers and planners and administrators can use this kind of more nuanced understanding to then help them decide on funding, financing, prioritizing strategies, things like that. So that's why this matters. Okay, so let me tell you a bit more about Theaster's work, because it matters actually for the conclusion section. This is not just for fun. So Theaster uses practices from the art world and the urban planning world. He's been trained formally in both. He's not just reaching over into another field, he bridges them. And so, for example, since 2009 on the south side, he has led the development of the Listening House on the left and the Archive House, which house thousands of books and music records from south side stores that had closed down. And so that includes, the building on the right. He uses wood from a closed down bowling alley to reconstruct the surface. So he's recycling in part, as part of his art. And let's see, he's also established a Black cinema arts house where they screen and discuss Black films, along with teaching local youth about film and hosting a series of film events and series. He's also led the development of the Dorchester Art and Housing Collaborative, which is a former public housing project. It was occupied by squatters, run down, but together with the Chicago Public Housing Authority and architects, he has changed it to become a mixed housing rental income project. Space for artists as well as folks who can afford it at market rate and reduced rates. And so, let's see. Okay, and then the last one I want to go over of his projects is the Stony Island Arts Bank. It was just about to be demolished. He bought it for $1, and then he raised millions of dollars to turn it into a community space, a gallery, a cultural resource for folks in the community to come and not just enjoy the space and participate, but to also learn about their own history. So his goal isn't to replace the role of government agencies in developing neighborhoods. He doesn't see himself as a full-time developer, and he doesn't claim to be fantastic at affordable housing building. But what he does do is add another kind of value to development work, where he uses an artist's perspective to make more nuanced considerations of race, class, gender, ethnicity. And so he's using cultural venues to help, the intent is to help organically regenerate the community, using like a bottom-up urban renewal or historic preservation. That's the approach. And so let's say he succeeds on the south side. He does this work, it's transformed. Is it generalizable? Where else could he go? Where might this approach work better than other neighborhoods? What might be the specifics that can tell us answers to these questions, and what might be the implications for practice and policy? So that's what this paper gets into. And so first of all, what does the literature have to say about this? And we found 10 studies that are at the level of zip codes, blocks, and county level. So pretty granular, not the case studies and not the whole nation studies. And so based on these 10 studies, half of them focus on where the arts tend to grow, and the other half tends to focus on how the arts tend to impact neighborhoods. And I was just looking, what do they have to say about this topic about using the arts in disadvantaged neighborhoods? And so they have some things to say, but not everything. So for example, where the arts tend to grow, across the first 5 studies, looking across them, what they tend to say is, well, the arts grow where the people are. Not much of a surprise. And it depends also on the type of arts we're talking about when you're asking about where they're growing. And also the kind of business model. Is it nonprofit? Is it small? Is it large? These are all factors. So, and then the other half of the literature says essentially the arts tend to impact employment and income and housing values, not very unexpected. Again, though, the impact, for example, if you're gentrifying or revitalizing, they suggest that it depends, again, on the kind of art we're talking about. And it also seems, now none of them officially look at how do the arts affect disadvantaged neighborhoods. But if you look at their regressions and their controls, those results suggest that what you think of associating with underserved communities or disadvantaged neighborhoods most likely will shape this relationship. So that's what the literature hints at. So now we want to get more specific, and we came up with a method, which is we use linear regression analysis to ask how do the arts impact neighborhoods. We also asked, so what's the impact of arts growth on disadvantaged neighborhoods compared to what is its general impact if you look across the entire nation? And then we also measured arts growth. We wanted to see, does the number of arts matter, or is it the speed of development that matters, or in how do they differently matter? So we also asked, for example, how the impact of the arts may differ between the neighborhood that hosts it versus all the neighboring neighborhoods. Is it very a focalized impact, or localized, or does it tend to perhaps keep it stable immediately there, but affect the surrounding areas more? The question is there a difference? And of course, what role does the scene, the inner cultural life of the neighborhood play in this relationship? And let's see. Okay, so this is just a visual to clarify what I mean by the hosting neighborhood versus the larger cluster of neighborhoods. And when we say the kind of arts, we compare two kinds, like a narrowly defined arts definition, which is more the left half of the slide, which is the more conservative, not conservative as in closed down, but dance companies, art galleries, orchestras, that kind of a more classic definition of the arts. And then the other comparison point was a more broadly, widely defined arts, which is the left and the right half. So that includes graphic designs and zoos and filmmaking and theme parks, so it's a much more flexible definition. Wondering, because as before, the definitions seem to play a big role in this relationship, so that's what we were testing as well. And then, of course, so we wanted to know about the role of scenes, and in this case, we chose to examine the role of Bohemia in influencing this relationship. And this map, this does not mean we live in deep, deep Bohemia, but I'm just trying to show that some neighborhoods are more Bohemian than others, in the example of Chicago, for example. So we are located right now where the star is, and the dots down here, if you can see them, that's where the Theaster Gates projects are located on the south side. So you can see they happen to be in a possibly more Bohemian neighborhood in the first place. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay. I mentioned, so we're interested in disadvantaged. How do we know which neighborhoods are disadvantaged, or what does that even mean? So what we wanted to know is which neighborhoods are most like and least like the ones where Theaster works. In this case, it means, disadvantaged means mostly comprised of low income, mostly comprised of African-American households. And so what this map will show you, sorry, let me go one back. This map shows you that we came up with a composite summary score that gives one number to each zip code on where it ranks on this disadvantage specific to this paper. And so this will tell you that the most disadvantaged, or the most like where Theaster works, are, not surprisingly, where Theaster works. And if you go up into the national level, then you might notice that the east side also happens to be a lot more like where Theaster works than elsewhere. So this tells me that the disadvantage score we have is reasonable. It matches up with reality. So I'm not going to go into all these details, but the point of the results is there are patterns across the arts definitions, across Bohemian and not Bohemian neighborhoods. All the juicy details are in the paper, but just briefly, what I wanted to say is, for example, we find that the number of arts establishments consistently, significantly, and positively predict or seem to impact neighborhoods, regardless of type of art. But, for example, the speed of arts is not always a significant predictor. It matters more in the least disadvantaged neighborhoods, for example. So there are larger patterns, and then there are these qualifications, depending on the level of disadvantage, depending on type of arts. So we can go there, but I will keep it shorter. I will go to the conclusions. What is the big picture outcome of this analysis? And what we suggest is, when you're going to use this approach somewhere, it's not just necessarily which neighborhoods are the best for this possibly, but it really depends on how you go about it, which is why I was telling you about how Theaster, how he goes about these projects. So I tried to emphasize that. So what matters is, okay, the more you build arts establishments, the more likely you're going to make a change, impact the neighborhood. You should take into account the type of arts. You should think about that the effect is dampened, tends to be dampened in disadvantaged neighborhoods, so you may need to do more if you want to achieve a certain amount of change. Speed sometimes matters, and location matters, which is also something you've probably heard before. You may want to intentionally miss the area that you want to impact because the influence may tend to be greater on the neighboring neighborhoods than the hosting neighborhood. And then, of course, basically we find that Bohemia makes a big difference, which is it tends to weaken this impact, this relationship between arts growth and neighborhood change. And then just the one level up higher conclusion, which is we find that basically there is no one size fits all. You must always understand your context and tailor it to it, which is what this artist does, right? He does not copy and paste a solution. And so using scenes, using analysis by level of disadvantage can tell us these nuances that can hopefully help us make better and more successful investments and project designs. So I'm gonna stop there. And thank you.
We have so many interrelated authors, I'm not sure who's gonna do what, so we'll just see how it goes. But I know how Terry works, so we're all used to this, right?
Hi everyone, my name is Hae-sun. I live in Chicago. My co-author, our paper title is Jacobs versus Franco-Gehry, examining the two visions for the city of the 21st century. My co-author, Matt Patterson, is now in Canada and University of Calgary. I will walk you through briefly why the iconic city and Bohemian city arose. So the background was that the modernists at the turn of the 20th century, they sought to solve the industrial era problems, congestion, pollution, disease through harmony and more neat zoning. They used the new material, which is a steel and glass, which made the modernist movement more innovative and new. Their principles were rationalization, standardization, and mass productions. So as you can see, Corbusier, Mies van der Rohe, Louis Sullivan, and Frank Lloyd Wright are a typical example of modern architects. Their planning was quite different from the architectural style. So modernist urban planning supported dramatic increase of population and also car ownership. So Frank Lloyd Wright's Broadacre City and Le Corbusier's Radiant City became a model for the urban planning after post-World War. And high-density, high-rise buildings based on the Le Corbusier's idea was modeled for in the American urban renewal and slum clearance according to the Housing Act of 1949 under Truman's Fair Deal. On the other side, suburban development was also popular and getting more attention with highway projects. Robert Moses built a lot of highways and also Levittown suburban housing development. But unfortunately, this modern urban planning declined due to several social ills. So spatial segregation created social segregation as well. Suburban development was mainly subsidized for white working class, which created racial and economic segregation. And also urban population declined, so only low-income class remained in the urban area, specifically in the public housing project. And those places had often regular breakdown of facilities and they were lack of funding for the maintenance. And those public housing projects, such as Prodigo in St. Louis, Robert Taylor Homes, one of the largest public housing projects in the U.S. in Chicago, they were all demolished eventually. So what came after as a post-modernism was the iconic city, which is one of two main urban visions that we evaluated in this research. So the iconic city, especially with the star architecture, seek for unique, distinctive, and more playful design instead of uniform modernist buildings. They are often consumer-oriented placemaking and cater to flagship cultural amenities. Examples are Franco Gehry, Rem Koolhaas, Daniel Libeskind, and Zaha Hadid. And there is a famous term, Bilbao effect. So after Franco Gehry's Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao City in Spain, their economy was a lot more improved. So in 3 years of completion of Guggenheim building, they earned $500 million of profit as well as $100 million of new taxes. So previously, Matt Patterson analyzed this whole star architecture projects throughout the United States as well as Canada. So there are total about 150 star architecture projects in the US. As you can see, Franco Gehry built most number of star architecture projects. Tomaine, Norman Foster, Renzo Piano, who is Italian architect, and also Daniel Libeskind, 5% of star architecture projects. In terms of the location of these star architecture projects, LA and New York City both have most number of projects. Toronto and Chicago, 4 projects. And also what's more critical about the iconic city and star architecture project is that they are often obsessed with the celebrity and image that cater to elites and the consumer with more higher income. And they tend to have grand aesthetic gestures that often don't fit in the context. So a famous quote by Franco Gehry is, I don't do context. And this becomes a problem, especially in the historical city. And they often encourage more driving with huge parking lot areas. So as you see here, LA Disney Museum by Franco Gehry, one of the problems is that people just directly go into the museum without walking on the street. So there's no pedestrian traffic. They just go directly into the museum. So the criticism is that it's a building or a sculpture or art, a piece of art. And also this iconic city are market-driven, which is more top-down approach that leads to gentrification, often unnecessary to neighborhoods. So as you see here, Zaha Hadid Galaxy Soho in Beijing is right next to Hutong, which is Chinese traditional area. So you can see the clear scale contrast between the traditional alleyway and the huge Zaha Hadid building, but also there's a contrast in terms of their lifestyle between the new and old. The other vision we evaluate is Jane Jacobs. And of course, her idea was influential to new urbanists and environmental architects and urbanists. So her idea has 4 principles to make neighborhood more walkable and more vibrant. So neighborhood should have high density, mixed building and mixed land use. Also need to have mix of old and new houses, and the sidewalk should be more used and the blocks should be shorter. So her example was from Greenwich Village during 1960s, which now we see more broadly internationally. So Jane Jacobsian city we call has another characteristics. So compared to iconic city, her vision is more small-scale development, and she encourages more historic preservation of architecture rather than new architecture. And also it's more encourages local amenities and community-driven growth. And of course, this should be created by grassroots, more bottom-up instead of top-down approach. And her vision is deeply associated with the Bohemian culture. So Bohemianism emerged in 19th century Paris. At first, they referred as liberal artistic lifestyle. And that often involves with the artistic and musical and literature career. And Bohemians were associated with anti-establishment, more transgressive social perspective. And as you see, the famous literatures are Baudelaire, Benjamin, Balzac, and Muset's writings, as well as the paintings of Moulin Rouge by Lautrec. So it started in France in 19th century, but we claim Bohemia culture now is more global. And many people in the past, including Florida, David Brooks, Richard Lloyd, Professor Clark and Dan Silver, and my dissertation extended this idea of Bohemianism. And the commonality is that driver of local economy, not just the artistic lifestyle. So previously I redefined the concept of Bohemia in terms of 5 characteristics. Music and art. At first, the Bohemians started in Latin Quarter and also Montmartre, but we also see this similar example in the Ricoh Park and Logan Square in Chicago, and also in Asia, like Seoul, street art district in Hongdae. Unconventional clothing style, which is more familiar in the Western context, more spotty style of outfits, and the non-hierarchical attitude. Instead, they pursue more egalitarian view, critical mass bicycle group, candlelight protests at City Hall in Seoul. And they often have higher tolerance to different diversity, like economic diversity and also ethnic diversity. And also Bohemians tend to work as a creative class industry. So San Francisco's tech hub and the startup companies is the example. So I also measured the Bohemian score using the Scenescape Bliss score method. So Scenescape project has collected amenity data for 15 years, and they basically codified those amenities into 15 scenes score. And this is ideal typical Bohemian scene. As you can see, the transgressive and the self-expressive score are the highest score out of 15 sub-dimension. And the Bliss point basically measures the distance between this ideal score and the actual scenes score of each zip code. So when you inverse that, you basically measures the proximity to the ideal Bohemian score. So our central research question is, do star architecture and Bohemia impact on art occupation and also walkability? Data-wise, we have commuting choice at the national level. So how do these cultural form impact on the art jobs and the walkability? So So our hypothesis is that when controlling for socioeconomic forms, population, gender, race, education, employment, and income, high density, diversity would induce more arts jobs and non-auto commuting choices. Also, we hypothesize that higher density, diversity with Bohemia and star architecture induce more arts jobs and non-auto commuting choices. So these are the dependent variables that we separately tested in our regression. So as you see, our jobs, walk to work, bike to work, and transit to work are the dependent variables. These are the independent variables. So basically, top 4 variables are according to Jane Jacobs' idea of density and mixed-use variable. And the last 2 variables we newly introduced as a cultural form variable. So Bohemian score, as I mentioned earlier, and also distance to the star architecture. Because we previously had the star architecture data across the US, we could retreat this star architecture as a distance variable. And the culture variable is basically demographic, socio-demographic profile of its zip code, population, employment, etc. So what we found from statistical analysis was that while controlling for these variables, both Bohemia and star architecture significantly induce art jobs, bicycle, and transit commute in the United States. So as you see in the table, Bohemia is positive, and the distance to the star architecture, the negative, that means farther from star architecture, it's negative to art jobs, walking, bicycle, transit. So in other words, the close to the star architecture, more art jobs, more walking, bicycle, and transit. And also, this research still confirms the past researches that density and mixed use generally have positive impact on art jobs and non-auto commuting choices. So we extended this statistical analysis with supplemental case study. I live in Chicago, so we could compare 2 neighborhoods, which is Wicker Park and Millennium Park. Millennium Park is more corporate, top-down approach, large park located in the east side of Chicago near the lakefront. Wicker Park is more neo-Bohemian neighborhood, as Lloyd did his case study, located in the northwest side of Chicago. So this is a comparison of transit station, half-mile from the train station, Adams Station in the Millennium Park, and the Damon Station in the Wicker Park. So as you see in these 2 maps, Wicker Park on the right side has more art amenities clustered together, more concentrated together, especially around the CTA transit station. So Millennium Park's art amenities are more scattered compared to Wicker Park. And as you see, the star architecture projects are in the Millennium Park as a campus of STAR's icon. But Millennium Park has higher transit accessibilities with 14 CTA stations, whereas Wicker Park there's only 1 CTA station, Damon Station. So as you can note here, we can draw the line where those arts amenities are mostly lined and clustered. So in the Millennium Park, the Michigan Avenue is of course, it's a well-known commercial street, but also a lot of arts amenities are concentrated along the Michigan Avenue. Whereas in the Wicker Park, Milwaukee Avenue is the one has the cluster of those amenities. In terms of the demographic change of these 2 neighborhoods, you can notice that the Millennium Park, Adams and Wabash, has population change almost 100% between 2000 and 2010. But Damon Station, which is in the Wicker Park, has had faster gentrification with more job change and more income change As you see, almost 27% the job grew in the Daemen station, and also income 60% increase in the Wicker Park. In terms of commuting choice, Millennium Park, most people walk to work, and in the Wicker Park, most people use transportation to work. And the bicycle commute is much higher in Wicker Park than Millennium Park. And next, we can talk about briefly about the star architecture project. So Millennium Park has many number of stars icons, famous architects, but also artists. So as you see, Franco Gehry's Pritzker Pavilion is the main star architecture project on the land. And the Renzo Piano Modern Wing at the Art Institute is new addition. Anishi Kapoor Cloud Gate, we often call the Bean, is also international artist. And Crown Fountain is another visitors spot in the Millennium Park. So the Pritzker Pavilion has a lot of free events, especially during the summer and the spring, throughout the fall. So moving the park is one of them. So it's a highly distinctive central piece of Millennium Park, and Frank Gehry often used the material, the metal and the stainless steel material in his project. So it's very distinctive characteristic of his architecture. And his bridge, now it connects from the Millennium Park and the new Maggie Daly Park on the lakeside. And also, you see this is an overpass of the roads underneath Columbus Drive. So you see most likely the lake and Maggie Daly Park, as well as the transportation and the cars underneath. So this is a snake shape of his bridge. The other star architect, Renzo Piano, is Italian architect, and this is very different from Franco Gehry's architecture style, because this is more neat and innovative use of material. So the nickname is the flying carpet. As you see, the roof looks like a carpet in the air. So it's very clean, but also innovative use of the lighting system and very light structure system. And what's most striking of this space is that it has the view directly towards the Millennium Park. So it adds a new cultural and innovative point of access from existing Millennium Park. And his bridge is also very different from Frank Gehry's bridge. So it connects from the Pritzker Pavilion up to the Art Institute, Modern Wings, Cafe, Terzo Piano. It works as a public observatory looking over the lake, park, skyscraper, and even activities on the ground level. So it adds as a new circulation in the park. Michigan Avenue is a commercial street right next to the Millennium Park. Especially the portion across this park is the oldest historical landmark area. It has architectural significance, but also cultural significance. Now we call it as a cultural mile. So it has a cultural center, symphony center, railway exchange building, now we call Santa Fe building, auditorium theater. They are all 19th and 20th century skyscrapers. And most importantly, the amenities along the Michigan Avenue are mostly franchise, like Starbucks, Pete's Coffee, Panera Bakery. So the only way you can differentiate those amenities are the label and name. There is no distinctive difference between the amenities at all. So this is very conventional storefront. And allow us to build by effect, there is a term Millennium Effect. There are 500 free events per year, which attracts approximately 4 million visitors every year. As a second most popular area after Navy Pier. And every year there is a new construction of residential hotels and other cultural places. Millennium Park's Harris Theater at the edge of the park as to existing theater district on Randolph Avenue, Randolph Street as a cultural mile. So as you see, these are all free events. One of the papers, there are a lot of papers on the Millennium Park impact. This paper found that buildings located near to Millennium Park generates over $10 million more in annual taxes than pre-park period, and $24 million more in sales taxes. So you see how it's growing economically. Wicker Park area is under West Town community in Chicago. It's neo-Bohemian neighborhoods. Now it's combining with arts, entertainment, and distinctive food scene. So in the 80s and 90s, the artists, a lot of artists live there because of strategic location, easy access to the loop with the CTA, and also this area used to have a lower rent. It has now a cluster of bars and restaurants and ethnic dinings, which have a live music and more small cultural activities in this Wicker Park. However, gentrification is another issue in this area. So gentrification in Wicker Park moved former artists to the other surrounding neighborhoods like Pilsen, Lowland Square, Jefferson Park, which now is lower rents than Wicker Park. And instead, the Wicker Park has attracted consumption of college-educated young professionals, but still it preserves a distinctive artistic scene combined with more handmade boutique cafes, restaurants renovated as a new style of architecture. You see the photos, the facade very colorful, but also distinctive and community-oriented the architectural style. Compared to Millennium Park. The other unique scene in the Wicker Park is the bicycle. So when you are on the Milwaukee Avenue, you see constant number of bicyclists on this area. So not just the bicyclists, but a lot of cafes, bars, and restaurants, they support these users. So they constantly attract more bicyclists with more food options. And in this area, bicycle commute is much higher than entire city of Chicago. And lastly, I found this survey in the Wicker Park Bucktown Market Assessment. So as you see, the satisfaction factor is highest in the cultural entertainment offering, and also variety of goods, and bicycle access is also one of the most important satisfaction factors for their residents. So the conclusion we made is that statistical analysis show that both Iconic City and Jacobson City have positive effect on art jobs and walkable commuting choice. So they are more complementary than contradictory. However, both urbanism should be differently encouraged in urban policy towards creative city. So Iconic City, which often top-down projects should be more located in the core of downtown with a large flagship cultural institutions and landmark architecture. And the Jacobson Bohemian City should be located more in the outskirts of the core with a community-based and organic and local business together. So that's what we have. Thank you.
Who's up?
I think I'm the last one.
Okay, well, Terry, how are we organizing these other, I'm not sure who's here.
Maxime?
Maxime is me.
Okay, you would be next.
So, would you like to
Can I
present?
print my computer or should
However, if you have
I have
it
a
on
thumb
a,
drive you can download.
I have the adapter, so
yes.
Okay, that's fine. Okay.
Have you started working with the 606?
A little bit, yeah, we talked about it, we've talked about it, we haven't done anything serious.
So Maxime, you get the prize for the best type.
For the best?
The best paper type.
You think so?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Boy, that was a very good start.
Okay. So this is it. HDV.
You-
I think. Can I withdraw?
No, I think we need, they told us that we weren't supposed to do that, so we need to load.
Okay. So can I will withdraw the USB key and.
Yeah, is that one yours?
Yeah.
Okay, so we should be able to find it out here, let's see.
See, Rick Skills is department chair and public administration expert.
Yeah.
When I
This is
started-
my nightmare. We actually
Yes,
talked
we
about
talked
this
about this
before.
before.
No, when I started international projects, the first thing I learned was I'm not going to have anybody who can help me. You've got to learn how to do this when I'm in Tokyo or whatever. So Rick is doing.
Okay.
I had commented when I was doing this
Let's see.
at HAPSA one time, and I had 3 of my students were in the audience. And as soon as it became clear that I was going to have to do something, they all,
Oh, it's not, that's not.
non-unified, came
Ah,
running
yeah,
up
that's
to
what
like
I'm thinking
assist
of.
me. And I
Oh,
did
I
say
see.
one
No, don't
was
do
my
that.
TA.
Don't use that one.
And I kept
I'm
saying,
sorry.
the only
That's
thing
not
I
a-
paid
that's
for
not
is
a
to deal with my IT.
Okay.
So you get paid well to deal with that.
Can we borrow?
But if you travel
Okay.
away from them,
I'll
that's
stay on there.
That was
where
it. It
gets
was just
problematic.
I'll just do a little dance here.
When I did get better at I had this thumb drive, I had the computer, I had emailed something to
I'm not really
myself.
sure this is progress.
Alright. I think
We got it? We got it
Just
saved?
wait a minute. It's transferring now.
All right.
Yeah. There we
Alright.
go. So I will just do a minute. I checked. And it's done.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
there we go. Yeah, we should have done that before, but everybody was. Right. Okay.
That one?
This is a good. Yes, this one.
Maybe just to frame very briefly, Maxime comes from a background of having worked in the Parisian context with Bourdieu and Bourdieu disciples, with a top-down Parisian hierarchical vision of domination and dominance. Bourdieu's first major book was called Reproduction, with Bourdieu and Passeron. And after they wrote the book together, the two authors split, and Passeron left Paris. He went to Marseille and set up a new sociology program with decentralization, popular culture, and an anti-hierarchical perspective, challenging Bourdieu. So Maxime studied with both of them. He's also worked in Grenoble, where they have a sort of decentralized local government public policy perspective. And then he spent a couple of years in Chicago. So he's put all these four together, and so here you'll see.
Thank you, Terry, for this introduction. So hello everybody, and I'm very pleased to be here to present my paper with Terry Clark here about the controversial title, I would say, More Bolshoi is the Good, comparing cultural scenes and participation in different French cities. So I'm introducing the research. This is so it's based on the French national cultural policies and about how they deal with multiculturalism, how French cultural policies deal with also integration and inclusion of different minorities, such as immigrant populations. So we are analyzing cultural participation in different French cities from different data sources. I will explain later how we did that, and we compare different kind of cultural amenities and scenes depending on socio-economic characteristic of the population. So to start with the topic, I will talk about the French cultural policies and cultural integration. So as you might probably know, French is republican, has a strong republican and egalitarian tradition. During history, the French state struggled to assimilate population and minorities, most of the time poorly integrated into French cultural life. So the French cultural policies seek especially national cohesion through inclusive and participatory cultural events in most cities and territories across the country. That means that for a long time, most of French cultural life was happening in Paris, but after the 60s, it started to spread all over the country in the different cities and regions in France. So they started to create new institutions, such as during the 19th century it was theaters, operas, and orchestras, and in the more modern period it was the creation of contemporary music festivals, such as the Festival d'Avignon, which is a very international and famous theater festival that happened in summer in Avignon for 1 month. And now you have more modern festivals such as Rencontre Transmusicale de Rennes, which is also for 15 days and gathering many music bands. And in Montpellier as well, you have the Montpellier dance that is in the spring, and the White Summer Festival in Montpellier, that is a Bohemian. My topic is not related to Bohemia, but for this specific case of the White Summer Festival in Montpellier, it's deal with the Bohemian culture. So since then, culture has become the main driver of integration into the French society. So what does that mean concretely? Cultural integration in France mostly depends on participation into cultural institutions. And Republican egalitarianism can be achieved through the recognition and the participation of the population into the French cultural life. So, and 3, French integration is achieved through the creation of cultural institutions by the state, not by other one. So I will explain 2 different examples of cultural policies in France. The first is the democratization of culture, which is related to the high art. High art must be accessible to everyone, and the other one that was implemented later during the 80s was trying to is defined from an enlarged notion of culture where minor arts and popular arts are equal to scholar and high arts. That means that cultural democracy does not make any hierarchy between arts. They are equal. So where does that come from? That comes from 2 famous French minister of culture. The first is André Malraux, that was at that implemented the concept of democratization of culture from the 60s until the 80s. And so it was a top-down culture located downtown mostly, started in Paris, and then he wanted to expand this model by the creation of the Maison de la Culture, houses of culture, that was supposed to attract the whole population independently of their social profiles. That could be the blue-collar workers and the CEOs and intellectual professions. So, culture for André Malraux had to become the new religion, and the Maison de la Culture had to be considered as the new cathedral of the 20th century. So culture had to be compared as well to cultural worship. The cultural production had to reach excellence and rise to international standards. There would be no vulgarization and challenging shows, even if the audience's educational level did not allow understanding it. And the opposite model is a cultural democracy implemented by Jacques Lang during the 80s, when the Socialist Party came into power with François Mitterrand in 1981. So it's more about related to pop culture and about the idea of spreading the pop culture outside of Paris. So by the creation of new institutions that were more not only scholar and classical, but more popular. So according to Jackland and his enlarged notion of culture, there should not be any hierarchy between minor arts and high arts, between noble and popular. Our way of living, our way of loving, the way we dress, the way we cook, also contains a beauty that should be introduced into the acts of social and civil life. So that's the main difference between the two typical and historical modern French cultural policies so far. We don't see, I'm not sure we see, yeah, we can read it still, but so these two kind of cultural policies differentiate scholar versus popular. What does that mean? So, and to what kind of institution ideal types relate these cultural policies? So the first one, democratization of culture, relates to scholar, which means that institutions are in most cases central, located central downtown in the city. They are in prestigious neighborhoods, and they should be attracting upper middle class institutional cultural lovers, and they are related to theater, museums, opera, regular audiences. Performance into these institutions are most of the time not improvised. They are intellectual, classical, and the classical artistic performance. The typical, ideotypical types of performance in France would be the Cyrano de Bergerac. It's a classical French national theater piece that is related to this kind of institutions. And last but not least, these kind of institutions seek reflection and sophistication. What is the main purpose of these institutions? On the opposite side, the popular model of Jackland is trying to implement institutions that are located not anymore in the prestigious downtown neighborhoods, but on the peripheral neighborhoods. We call it the hoods, but I will explain why. And that should attract new kind of populations, not only the higher level professions, but immigrant population, most of the time poorly integrated into local cultural life. Performance inside this new kind of institutions should be improvised, most of the time popular and young. The ideal type would be rap, slam, breakdance. That's the new kind of cultural policy that you will see now in most French cultural institutions. And what they are seeking most of the time, the performance in these institutions are seeking the seek of pleasure. So they are very different. So the first ideal type, so I try to conceptualize this two types of cultural policies. The first ideal type of institutions related to the high art cultural democratization would be what in France? This is actually not in the French example, but would be for me the Bolshoi. But where is located the Bolshoi? It's located in Moscow. Where is it in Moscow? It's quite in central place in Moscow. And so it's the very classical 19th century typical national institutions of culture, high culture. For France, what would be the institution ideal type? Bolshoi ideal type would be probably la Comédie Française. La Comédie Française or the Louvre as well. They are former cultural institutions, of course, but since now the Malraux cultural policies, the program are implemented by the French Cultural Ministry, so they control both the La Comédie Française and the Louvre. So the programs are related and controlled by the state. So they are still dependent from the state. And also, you can see that the Louvre as well as the La Comédie Française are occupying a central place in Paris. The opposite of this model would be the cultural democracy model. So that is trying to enlarge cultural policies to new territories from downtown to suburbs. So in French, suburbs is called banlieue. We say banlieue. That's significant. The suburb and it has been conceptualized by rappers and insiders as well as the hood. That's why I conceptualized the Bolshoi versus the hood. So mostly innovated in France by immigrants and also poor populations. So in France, another type institutional model of popular arts and cultural democracy policy would be the Le Merlan Theater in Marseille. It was actually during the 60s, 70s, it was actually at the beginning communal small theater controlled by the City Hall of Marseille. Once the new policy was implemented by Jack Lang, so the state started to change the branding of this theater into a national scene. So it was communal and it became a national scene. So it was raised into a new standard. And should be, it had to attract new kind of population, such as be strongly related to the neighborhoods where it's located, and it's located where? Exactly in Marseille. As you can see on the map, it's the north side of Marseille. This is actually very immigrant and poor neighborhoods, side of most of the time related to crimes, drug dealers, and we could tell a lot about that. We had some kind of experience with ethnographic experience with Elena and our colleague in Marseille. On the opposite side, you have also the La Criée Theater that you can see is located national theater as well, but it's located in downtown Marseille, just right on the old port, that is a central historical place of Marseille. So these kind of institutions that are both controlled by the states are implementing very different kind of cultural policies. So, how these cultural policies deal with both with egalitarianism, universalism, and multiculturalism, and how are immigrants more integrated into local cultural life? Are they participating into national or more local cultural institutions, or conversely, are they creating their own cultural scenes and organizations, and consequently remain distant from national cultural offerings? And how, last but not least, how are concepts like multiculturalism being redefined by these cultural institutions when they have to implement cultural policies? So to achieve this kind of research, we started to look at new data. So we are using the national INSEE data, that is the national statistics official kind of data that you find on the French website. But we also downloaded different types of cultural amenities from the French yellow pages. So, such as different kind of amenities, such as libraries, cultural centers, music conservatories, museum, classical orchestra, theaters, art galleries, movie theaters, and concert halls. Then we added cultural associations as very independent cultural amenities, not controlled by the state, also from the yellow pages. And then we downloaded on the total 19,225 addresses of cultural amenities in 15 different French cities. So, then we merged this data with the National Institute of Statistics kind of data that you find online. And the scale for merging file was iris code. Iris code is an infra-communal level that divides the territories of communal territories, let's say, into small units of equal or below 2,000 inhabitants. So they are very, very small, tiny units. So how we compare now these two kind of different amenities, dependent or independent? So we comparing cultural scenes and participation in different French cities. So we started to conceptualize scenes with high concentration of top-down cultural amenities and institutions. So that's our first category. Typically include library, cultural centers, music conservatories, museums, classical orchestras, and theaters. These kind of amenities are subsidized by the state or by public funding. And on the opposite model, we have the scenes with high concentration of independent and local cultural amenities that includes art galleries, they are private, movie theaters, most of the time private as well, concert halls, private as well, and cultural associations, dependent from individuals most of the time. So now we did some regression tests to analyze this data, and the first one was to try to capture and understand to which profile immigrants are the most likely related to in the 15 cities that you can see here. So these are actually this is actually the I don't know how I would say that the aggregation of regression tests. This is not a regression table, but this aggregates multiple regression tests that we did to simplify the reading. Otherwise, it's multiple tables and it will be endless. So, as you can see, by dividing different social and professional professions, between different professions, you can see that immigrants are most likely to be related with people without an employment or with blue-collar workers. You can find some exceptions in different cities, such as in Marseille, Toulouse, Strasbourg, Paris. As well, you can see that we have employees in some cities. In some cities as well, we can find immigrants with correlated with higher level professions. That means that they are highly educated, and some business owners in Paris. So it means that immigrants are also doing business in Paris. I'm surprised that it's not correlated in Marseille, as you have a lot of exchange in Marseille between the Mediterranean and North African countries, but it's not correlated. So now we analyze the participation and scenes for top-down cultural amenities and institutions. So dependent variable was the top-down cultural kind of institutions that concentrate different kind of amenities, library, cultural centers, conservatories, museum, all together. So to what kind of population are they the most likely related? So we can see that top-down cultural amenities are more likely to be related to higher level professions in different, in Avignon, Marseille, you can see that. And whereas for immigrants, just 2 cities are related to this kind of amenities. Yes, and the same table for independent cultural associations. Surprisingly, we can see that higher level professions are also related to independent cultural associations. That is a surprise. That is very interesting. Whereas for immigrants, there's a small increase in different cities, but it's still lower than compared to the higher level professions. So this is interesting because once you start to analyze with compare the two different variables with 3 key kind of populations, such as immigrants, higher level professions, and business owners. So when you compare top-down and independent cultural associations, you can see that in most cases, actually, the higher level professions are more related to independent cultural associations than to top-down kind of amenities. So that is interesting because in most classical theory of sociology of future, such as Bourdieu, they would say this would be more related to top-down cultural association, to top-down cultural institutions. So the high-level profession will be here, but they are here. This is interesting. We will see why later. So now, what we did is we analyzed the participation and scene between immigrants and different types of top-down cultural institutions. That means that in this table they are divided. They are not, aggregated in just one variable. They are divided. So we compare different types of them with dependent variable immigrants. So interestingly, you can see that they are not really related to this kind of institution, but in libraries and cultural centers, that is in France very, very the social and socialist type of cultural policy in different cities, you can see that there are some correlations in Marseille, Montpellier, Lille, and Angers, places where the social cultural policies in France are very, very strong, historically strong. So there is a relation here, and there are relations as well with theater in Marseille, as Marseille is a very strong theater city. You can find many, many theaters. So we did the same with a higher level profession, with top-down cultural institutions. And as you can see, it's interesting because just before we had more correlation in this kind of amenities. Now we have more correlation with museums, classical orchestras, and theaters. Just only correlation, one correlation in Strasbourg with cultural centers, and one correlation with library in Lille. So that is interesting because there is a kind of opposite situation between the two kind of categories. So now we have analyzing participation between higher level profession and different type of local independent cultural amenities. That means that these kind of amenities are not related to the French state or cultural ministry, and with higher level professions. So we find that associations are also, as we have seen just before, also strongly related to higher level professions. That means that higher level professions are likely to create their own associations as well. It's not only immigrants, but also them. They're probably not satisfied with the cultural policy from the state. Also with art galleries and concert halls. By comparison with immigrants, sorry, I went too fast. Yeah. In comparison with immigrants, it's only associations that are related to this kind of populations. No correlation with art galleries, negative or no correlation with movie theaters, just one in Marseille with concert halls. But we are just seeing that. And now for the two last tables, when we compare top-down cultural institutions and local versus local independent cultural amenities, so these are the local, and these are the top-down cultural. So we are comparing the two kind of type of amenities, dependent of different. This one are dependent of cultural policies. With number of immigrants, you can see that we have more correlation with associations. Still no with the art gallery, with no movie theaters, no concert halls this time. But still we have three correlations with library, cultural centers, and in Angers with library as well. That means that's probably related to social cultural policies here, whereas we have in different cities a strong correlation with associations. That means that we are creating probably more associations themselves. And last but not least, here we have the same kind of table with higher level professions. You can see here that we have no correlations, but more correlation with now local and independent cultural amenities, with orchestras and theaters, but still with associations, art galleries and concert halls. But for conclusion, primo, higher level professions are more related to local cultural scenes and amenities before being integrated into national cultural institutions. That means that there is a kind of continuum between local and top-down national kind of amenities. This totally contradicts past studies in sociology of culture, such as Bourdieu, even Passeron, that have traditionally emphasized polarized patterns in cultural participations. So before this kind of study, social scientists said, higher level professions, they are all in top-down and national institutions. That's not completely true. Secondo, immigrants are neither integrated into national nor into local cultural life. Instead, they are more likely to be creating their own independent cultural organizations. We find significant and positive correlation between the immigrant populations and independent cultural associations, more than with other kind of cultural amenities. 3, should we have more brochure in the hood? That's a question of the paper and the problematic. After more than 30 years of inclusive cultural policies toward immigrants and years, most of the cultural institutions in France have failed in integrating these populations. So fostering a broader sense of culture where institutions can be part of a larger scenes and in the European geography of the city could probably change the situation if they want. So if they do not, the institutional doldrums could be lasting longer. Thank you very much. And then you next. Okay.
We were obviously running short on time, so
Yes.
that was bad.
Let's see, is the thumb drive still on?
All right.
When are we supposed to be done?
11:30 is when the next panel starts.
So we have to be out of here.
We have both of we have Elena and Mary? Is that?
This is Mary. Yeah.
Yes, this is Mary, and so Elena, okay.
Yeah, so
two-
if, I'm sorry,
I'll try to go fairly quickly.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so the basic question we're looking at, like a lot of other people, is whether or not arts in Bohemia as a cultural form predict non-auto commuting choices, basically. We already defined Bohemia. We basically think that this might be possible because Bohemians might have a commitment to going slowly through the streets, basically as a way of getting creative inspiration. We also think that perhaps their countercultural disposition makes it where they want to effectively stick it to the man and use non-auto commuting choices rather than driving cars. And also they might just be more economical and environmentalist in this way and commit to living in places where they can take public transit or bike to work. The basic theories of scenes, we still use the Bohemian bliss point, just like others have used before. If you compare Bohemian scores in different cities across the US, you'll notice like these are the top 6 most populous cities plus Nashville. Most of them have some neighborhoods that are extremely Bohemian and others that are extremely not Bohemian. Even places like Houston have some areas that are much more Bohemian than others. And on the mean, places like New York and LA tend to be a little bit more Bohemian than places like Nashville or Houston. If we are to look at correlations with individual amenities, we can see each city has their own sort of unique Bohemian scene. And somewhere like Nashville, you have a lot of things like talent agencies, commercial artists, and coffee houses reflecting its music scene there as what's driving Bohemia. While in somewhere like Chicago, it's a little bit more generic with things like tattooing, books, dealers, tobacco stands, less necessarily rooted in the arts. Which we can similarly look at if we look at the number of individual art industries out of 77 possible ones as a wide definition of the arts, kind of like what Yasemin talked about. Somewhere like New York has a wide variety of arts strongly associated with its Bohemian cultural scenes, while somewhere like Nashville or Chicago only has a handful of artistic institutions with strong correlations with Bohemia, showing the different types of variety of art going into it. Before we get into our results, the commuting choices just on the mean in different US cities vary dramatically. Places like New York, over 50% of people use alternative types of transportation to get to work, while somewhere like Houston or LA, it's around 10%, reflecting just how bikeable, walkable, and public transit friendly these cities are to begin with before we even introduce cultural forms. Which similarly, if we look at individual neighborhoods in each of these cities, even in places like Nashville, you have particular cities where over 80% of people are using alternative forms of transportation to get to work. Even though on the mean, there are outliers like New York and Philadelphia that are more alternative transportation friendly. So for regression analysis to look into this, we use different types of dependent variables, basically just showing different commuting choices. And then we have independent variables for cultural forms and also urban forms. So, and socioeconomic forms. So population, income, cost of living, those types of things. And then also in the Jane Jacobs type of way, we have housing density, retail density, housing age diversity. And what we introduce, importantly, is Bohemia and arts. And what we find is that Bohemia is a strong driver of bicycle and alternative transit and public transit use in the whole of the US, in Chicago, New York, LA, and Houston. And in Houston, Bohemia and arts employment are more significantly related to non-automotive transportation than a lot of the density variables, while retail density still attracts more walking, which makes sense just because you already live in a neighborhood that is walking friendly. New York and Chicago, Bohemia strongly predicts bicycle commutes, and same with the US as a whole. In the US as a whole, New York, LA, and Houston, more Bohemian places, have more people commuting by public transit. What we did find that was surprising is that Bohemia has an overall negative effect on walking in the US, and it's only significant in Los Angeles and positive there. And Bohemia has a positive effect on driving in the US as a whole, but in none of our individual cities, which, again, some of these results surprised us. We hypothesize that this is because in the US as a whole, if you have people intentionally living in Bohemian neighborhoods, chances are you live far away from your work. And most places in the US are not necessarily public transit or biking friendly. So if you're making the conscious choice to live in a Bohemian neighborhood, even if you would prefer to use bicycle, public transit, etc., you're making the conscious choice to be long enough from your work that you have to drive. And the fact that in all of our individual cities, driving was not predicted by Bohemia and usually negative, tells us that in most of these cities there's at least some type of alternative transportation available as an option if you so desire, and that there is a demand from Bohemians to use this alternative transit. For the arts, we find that arts employment has a significantly positive relationship with walking, bicycling, and public transit use in the whole of the US and 5 of our cities. And along with arts, the presence of technology firms also attracts more walking and public transit use in New York and Chicago, which tells us, our intuition that Silicon Valley types are more Bohemian might be somewhat correct. We also still confirm the past research about housing, retail, and mixed use. Density driving alternative forms of transportation. We don't find that housing age diversity really has an effect, though, contrary to Jane Jacobs' arguments. And density is also a key factor, except for in Houston, perhaps because Houston's just so undense to begin with, it's not going to make much of an impact. So what we basically find in terms of implications is that where the availability of public transit, biking, and biking is present, there's a demand from Bohemians to use it, even if that's not currently available in the US as a whole, and we suggest that future research focuses more on the impact of culture on community choices. That's quick, but
Well, thank you.
Thank you. You ready?
Could you give me the USB key?
Oh, do you need the
It's on
USB
it.
too?
It's on the computer.
Thank you very much, because I have the same problem as
Go
Maxime.
for it.
While we're pausing for a second, let me add that Peter Ochteberg spent a summer here. He's a Dutch collaborator, and we were reading and arguing about the new book, Bowling Alone. And Bowling Alone analyzes obviously, big impact, the decline of civic activities. And so we looked and we said, you know, he doesn't differentiate by issue area. What if we look at different types of issues, religious groups, unions, etc. So we broke out everything we could get, and we used Putnam's own data from the DDB, and then we used the World Values Survey and did the same thing. We found in both of them that Putnam was right for most of the issue areas with one big exception: arts and culture, which were taking off. They were the opposite of Putnam's findings. Putnam says nothing about this in his book. He sort of sneers at the arts, doesn't pay attention to them, and doesn't report that finding. That in turn, but arts participation has doubled in the U.S. in 20 years. It's tripled in the Netherlands in the same, so 1980 to 2000 roughly. And so this similarly, the National Endowment for the Arts only tracks mostly what they did, let's say they published what they call their benchmark results, which is classic narrow measures of symphonies, opera, museums, etc. If you broaden the definition of the arts, you find a dramatic increase, including the more popular arts, such as discussed by Maxime and the others here. So the new potential for civic engagement is the arts in ways that Putnam has left out. So Putnam's basic conclusion is that we're getting more uncivic, more unintegrated, less legitimacy, potentially, by bowling alone. But he ignores the internet, he ignores the downloading of music, he ignores the stand-up comedies, the local neighborhood bands and so forth. And so that's what a lot of these papers are now trying to do, from Theaster Gates on the South Side, having black cinema and discussion by the people in the audience, and then trying to incorporate immigrant minority concerns into and through the arts and development and civic activities, is what these various papers are capturing and identifying. I mean, it's not a rosy, simple picture by any means, but looking at the subtleties of how it works is something that has been minimally done by political scientists, sociologists, or anybody. So this is very new stuff, and so I'm proud of what we're seeing here, and and it's breaking new ground, as you can see by the size of the audience.
but they've been very loyal.
We're proud to have Annette Steinecker in the audience, who's the organizer of all the urban sessions. So she is an innovator and is watching that, and she's one of the leading editors of the Urban Affairs Review. So keep it in mind, folks.
Yes. Because we are multidisciplinary, as all of this research.
Yeah,
You know, Terry, one of the things, and because I'll just slide in a comment, I will send other comments out, but that whole,
Do you still have your ones?
do you need a,
Oh, no? Yeah. I think my.
you know, whether the arts can be thought of as a unidimensional concept or not. I mean, I think Maxime's paper is a really interesting question.
For sure.
Not only it's a path to engagement, but it's also a path to separation.
Yes.
And so you have this sort of counterintuitive finding that while you may be expanding participation, you're actually creating you're also creating walls, and that's kind of an interesting that's an interesting dilemma. Plus, this whole notion of using arts as a policy tool, I think is a fascinating issue. One of which we don't, what does that say about the arts conceptually? And I'm actually really quite intrigued with that notion. And one of the cheap shots I would take about all the papers is we need to think about that more as arts as policy tool.
And does that take us back to more of those traditional, conventional art forms, because that's where we've had more government and nonprofit, traditional nonprofit
We know how to
development.
include that.
But in terms of your question, Rick, the U.S. is really internationally a strong outlier in having no Ministry of Culture, no kind of centralized state, as Maxime would talk about it. And so it's great to do this internationally, cross-nationally, because that gives us very... Okay.
Okay.
We're ready.
Sorry for this technical problem. So how much time do I have?
Let's see.
Usually?
About 5 minutes.
5 minutes?
Yeah, I'm
Okay,
sorry
nice.
about that.
So, I will speak on French music conservatories. In the political science perspective, so Maxime just presented the stage of development of French cultural policies associated with André Malraux, and consequences on music conservatories. That was the creation of original conservatories, appointment of well-known musicians or position directors, and the traditional approach to musical education and elitist approach. However, it was rather easy to enroll to a music conservatory. So then the second stage of evolution of French conservatories, it was the Jack Lang's period. Maxime was already gave some details about it. So it's all about the inscription in the neighborhood realities, the openness of musical education, and education of popular music as rap, rock, etc., and integration of new educational methods, alternative methods dissociated from solfeggio. So now we have the system of music conservatories in France, which is multi-level, which has municipal, departmental, regional, national, and European levels. And so we have the traces of these two political waves. So it's pretty complicated, and it's interesting research object because it's all about political science, educational science, sociology of culture. So it's rather original as an object of study. So we have a multi-level system and a very heterogeneous system. As we compare three regions, we can see the differences of the quantity of the territorial disposition of conservatories. We can see that it's even more difficult when to understand the system when we compare the concrete cases, for instance, of French regions. Now this heterogeneous, complex, multi-level system is confronted to the new challenge associated with European integration. So the conservatories should now change their vertical systems of submission to the Ministry of Culture, and try to find the new ways, new horizontal ways of collaboration and of creation of the new European connections. The cause of this is above all the weakness of the state control, who actually can't afford this multi-level and complex system. Today we have the other economic context, so that the conservatories should survive and survive in the European context. It is very difficult to find the statistical information which will give the whole information. So I was based on a bottom-up reference of it is like a national association. It's like yellow pages specialized on the conservatories, because you can't find the national statistics which will gather all these multi-level and multi-administrative submissional system. So we have two national conservatories, then regional, departmental, intercommunal. Several years ago it was communal, but now that is a territorial reform that we reorganize several conservatories in an intercommunal level, so it's bigger. And you have then private music schools. So which were the problems of state management? It was independence from marketplace. In consequence, the conservatories were isolated and estranged from the world. The need of scientific research, and it was dissociated from the research unities. Need of new music and the state program, like this Bolshoi, which was discussed by Maxime, so was dissociated from these new needs. And the need of European harmonization, and the state management of conservatories couldn't adapt to it. So we have now a great changement. So here is this citation of Marcello's Subscalar, just to describe the conservatism of the music education, which is not adapted to the reality. So what we have now, that's new decentralized management of conservatories. So we can see that in several years we have very different financial support of the state, which varies, and 2 years ago the state was quasi disengaged from the conservatories, which created a lot of polemics. So now it is supported by the state, but not so much. So the local authorities should find a new solution.
sorry to bother you guys, but we have another panel in here at 11:30.
Okay.
We're finishing,
So
right?
shall I finish?
2 minutes?
Yes.
2 minutes.
Yeah, that's.
Okay. Conservatories before and now, so it's different. I could explain why, but I have no time. Bologna process, we have the changement on the level of diplomas. It's the new system, licence, master, doctorate. So, okay. I don't know if I should explain because I have 2 minutes and it's
The maps.
the maps, right? Okay, here is the proportional meaning of conservatories which will integrate the new diploma system, but I have no time to talk about this diploma system. So we can see that the new conservatories, European conservatories, are built mostly on the basis of the previously existing poles of music education known already by the European instances. So there are the pre-existing clusters of music education, which are actually now known and recognized as European. Now we have regional reform, which comes and which will impact the conservatories here as the regional level, and we can see that in Marseille, in Paris, and in Lyon, we have the most powerful conservatories. Now, after the regional reform, we can see that the rapport of influence have changed and it's more homogeneous now. So the other point was the teaching of the disciplines as Baroque music and contemporary music, and we can see that it's changed, but not so much. So thank you very much. Shall I finish now?
All right, I thank you all, and I will send some comments out to others. I'm certainly not going to try and do that, but appreciate it. Too much.
And everyone getting their thumb drive.